In his 1991 musical, Children of Eden, composer and Carnegie Mellon University graduate Stephen Schwartz told the story, well, two stories actually, found within the book of Genesis, that of creation and that of Noah. To bridge those two stories, he wrote a song titled Generations, which draws the line of lineage from Adam to Cain to Seth all the way to Noah. It's a cheery calypso style number that celebrates, well, human progress, I suppose. It's energetic, it's fun, it's happy. Begat to begat to begat to begat now. It's exactly what one would expect from a musical. And yet, and I truly mean no offense to Mr. Schwartz, I admire his work very much, it has about as much in common with actual biblical genealogies as, well, as I do with him. Is the list technically accurate? Well, sure. Did Stephen and I technically attend the same college? Yes. Though not at the same time, and certainly not in the same program. Leaving it at just this, however, leaves out some pretty important information. It doesn't capture the full story of what's really going on, and if we're going to be honest, not just cute, not just fun, not just celebratory, but honest, we need to look at the full story. And while they may seem like the driest, dustiest parts of the Bible, genealogies can actually be some of the most revealing parts of Scripture. They tell us who did what and who was linked to who. They tell us what good things happened and what not so good things happened. They even tell us things in who they include and who they leave out. So today, let's look at our text and let's get honest, because we are smack dab in the middle of LGBTQ Pride Month, and it is the day after Juneteenth, the day that slaves in Texas found out that for years, they had technically been free. So if this is not a day for honesty, well, I don't know what is. Schwartz's song sings of generations of Adam, but that is not our song today. Our song today is Generations of Abram. Abram, who stares at those stars in the sky and who is told that his descendants will be even more numerous than them. Abram, a man who does not yet know and cannot yet know what greatness and horror, what honor and pain, what loss and liberation await the generations that will follow him. He cannot yet know of the gruesome choice he will feel it necessary to make around his own son, nor the fact that he will nearly make the wrong one. He cannot yet know of the bravery of Rahab, the Canaanite woman that would find her way into his family through Salmon and their son Boaz. Or the courage of Ruth, the Moabite woman that would find her way into his family through Boaz and their son Obed. He cannot know of David and his love for Jonathan or Michal and his acts of questionable consent with Bathsheba and the pain that befalls his children. He cannot know of kings like Rehoboam or Jotham or Hezekiah. He cannot know of the kings who will be omitted from the list at the time. He cannot know of exilarchs like Jeconiah or high priests like Zadok, or the governors like Zerubbabel who will help rebuild the temple. He certainly cannot know of the writers who will someday try to link him into a entirely different faith tradition. The generations of Adam, of Abram, like stars in the sky. Abram, a name meaning exalted father, who later becomes Abraham, a name meaning father of multitudes. These multitudes that we speak of today come from the book of Matthew, and they are full of information. First off, there are women in this list, which is not a common occurrence in biblical genealogies. And this version of the genealogy follows the line of David's son Solomon, which is all well and good, except for when you look at the book of Luke, you'll see that the genealogy there gets to David and then follows the line of his son Nathan instead. Wait, what does that mean? Did somebody mess up? Did they get it wrong? Not so fast. There's a few possible explanations here. This genealogy that we have in Matthew isn't necessarily a biological one, though Luke's is. It's a kingly one. It's a legal one. It's following, if anything, a lineage of power, connecting Abram or Abraham to Jesus via Joseph. And this is important because one of the goals for the writer of Matthew is to link Jesus to the throne of David. And this, it's literally the first step. So rather than just going by blood, this is going by power, which explains why it leaves out certain people, or why it ties Jesus in through Joseph, who is technically his stepdad. And then there's even this Joseph has two dads theory, which basically says that Mary didn't have any brothers, so Mary's dad took Joseph in as a son, which ties Joseph into both genealogies. And these are just two theories. There's more than that. And neither of them is certain, but their plausibility teaches us so much about family values and family systems and power dynamics. And all of this is coming from just some names on a page. All of this from the generations of Abram. But of course, Abram, or Abraham, isn't the only one with descendants as numerous as stars in the sky. We're coming off the celebration of Juneteenth yesterday, the first one that our federal government recognizes as a national holiday. Even though so many of our Black siblings do not live lives in which we can truly be free. Remember that on June 19th, 1865 in Galveston, Texas, slaves found out that they had been freed, even though Robert E. Lee had surrendered on April 9th, 1865, and the Emancipation Proclamation had come into effect on January 1st, 1863. And yet still, all these years later, how many of us are still imprisoned? How many of us steady ourselves at any given moment, knowing that each step, each car ride, each television show we watch at home could be our last? How many of us hold our breath when our children leave our homes for fear that they will never return? How many of us have literally struggled to breathe as COVID hit our community so much harder than our white siblings? How many of us are dying to scream because of the emotional pain and microaggressions that aren't so micro? Dying to scream over physical pain that hits us harder and gets treated less severely. Dying because our lives aren't considered as valuable. We are the generations of Frederick, still living in pain, praying for the day of healing, recalling the words in Frederick Douglass's "What is to the slave the 4th of July?" The rich inheritance of justice, liberty, prosperity, and independence bequeathed by your fathers is shared by you, not by me. The sunlight that brought light and healing to you has brought stripes and death to me. You may rejoice. I must mourn. We do more than mourn, however. For as we recall freedom promised and freedom given and freedom not yet obtained, we honor the fact that we are still here. We uplift the fact that we have made it this far. And this is particularly important for those within the lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, and queer communities, as it is also LGBTQ Pride Month. And in the tradition of Abram and Frederick, we celebrate the generations of Stormy. Born in New Orleans in 1920 to a Black mother and white father, Stormy Delorier was a pillar of strength with the audacity to serve as a bodyguard in Chicago mobsters and perform as the only male performer in the 50s and 60s in New York City's Jewel Box Revue, the period's only racially integrated drag troupe. She wore her suit during performances and in public. She guarded gay bars in Chelsea, and, according to her, she threw the first punch at the Stonewall uprisings. She spent her life, up until the day she died in 2014, doing performances at benefits for abused women and children. She was even known as the Rosa Parks of the gay community. The generations of Stormy, the generations of strength and fearlessness and kindness. We uplift the importance of the intersections, of quiet sacrifice, of the behind the scenes work. And in the tradition of Abram and Frederick and Stormy, we celebrate the generations of Bayard, a Black man, a gay man, and a Quaker. Bayard Rustin, born in 1912 in Westchester, PA, was a faithful man whose religious values, quote unquote, were based on the concept of a single human family and the belief that all members of that family are equal. This led him to stage an impromptu sit-in at a restaurant that would serve his white high school football teammates, but not him. It led him to be honest with his grandmother about preferring the company of young men over girls. It led him to joining the Fellowship of Reconciliation, to going to jail for refusing to serve the military as he was a conscientious objector, to being transferred to a high security prison for staging desegregation protests in prison and being openly homosexual. It also led him to help plan the 1963 March on Washington, a feat he was not able to bask in, as some, such as Representative Reverend Adam Clayton Powell, sought to use his sexual orientation against him. And yet, Bayard remained a fiercely Black, fiercely gay, fiercely pacifist activist until he died in 1987. The generations of Bayard, the generations of justice and humanity and human rights. We uplift the importance of openness and honesty. And in the tradition of Abram and Frederick and Stormy and Bayard, we celebrate the generation of James. Novelist, playwright, activist, poet. So many words can be used to describe James Baldwin, born in 1924 in our own fair city of New York. His words have inspired, excited, consumed, provoked, even scandalized. His work, Giovanni's Room, dealt with self-acceptance, homosexuality, and bisexuality 13 years before the gay liberation movement began in the United States in 1969. Yet he was not afraid to speak truth, whether about sexuality or race, or just about himself. Recently, an ABC interview that had been buried has come to light. And in it, when he was asked about this book and whether he wanted to get his sexuality on the record, he replied, I don't know if I wanted to get it on the record, but I wanted to confront it. I was very glad that it was done. It simplified my life in another way. It meant I had no secrets. Nobody could blackmail me. You didn't tell me, I told you. Deeply himself until his death in 1987. The generations of James. Unrestrained, unbothered, and true. We uplift the importance of love, liberation, and joy. And in the tradition of Abram and Frederick and Stormé and Bayard and James, we celebrate the generations of Marsha. Marsha P. Johnson. Marsha, pay it no mind Johnson. Marsha, darling, I want my gay rights now. Johnson. Ooh. Born in Elizabeth, New Jersey in 1945, there isn't enough, I could say, to capture who Marsha P. Johnson was. She was a self-identified drag queen and gay liberation activist. She was the co-founder of Street Transvestite Action Revolutionaries, otherwise known as STAR. She was part of ACT UP and worked as an AIDS activist. She was known as the mayor of Christopher Street, and most famously, she was one of the most prominent figures at the Stonewall Uprising. She is the stuff of legends. She joined the Gay Liberation Front and marched in the Christopher Street Liberation Day parade, the precursor to the Gay Pride Parade 1 year later in 1970. And by 1973, that same parade banned her and fellow activist Sylvia Rivera because they felt that drag queens, the very people who started the revolution, were giving them a bad name. Lack of gratitude. And yet, Marsha continued on with her head held high, living her life and helping her community until she was found dead in 1992. Langston Hughes once asked, what happens to a dream deferred? About Marsha, a friend of hers asked, what happens when a flower gets wilted? Does it just die away and it's forgotten? To which another friend responded, well, hopefully, that flower would have shed some seeds that will grow into a movement. Generations of Marsha. The generations, the seeds of joy, liberation, and love that continue to grow into a movement. This is why genealogies are so important. The Marshas, the James, the Bairds, the Stormays, the Fredericks, they are all in their own ways, Abrams and Abrahams in their own rights. They are the ancestors who could not have imagined their descendants like stars in the sky, living and growing and suffering and surviving and thriving beyond their wildest dreams. They are forebears who have guided the way and made it possible for so many to be here, so many to be connected, if not by blood, then by divine connection. And as we look forward, as we look at where we are today, we see new stars being born in their image all around us. New numbers being added to the generations. New names that will be added to these grand genealogies. And they, as much as us, as much as these names that we read in Matthew, as much as the stars God called out of the sky, are truly, truly, truly holy. Amen.